Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Economics. How are you all doing? I hope you all are doing good. Today I brought for you all May-June 2025 2281 and 0455 variant 12. We'll be doing MCQs today, so let's quickly dive into the paper and see what this paper has for us today. MCQ number 1. MCQ number 1 says a university rejects 2000 qualified applicants who wish to study there. Which factor of reduction would have caused the university to make this decision? Now, if you look at the options available, option number A says infinite quantity of capital, B says scarcity of labor, C says surplus of land, and D says unlimited supply of enterprise. Now, if you look at the options A to D, except for option B, all the other options are pointing towards a surplus except for B. Rejecting qualified applicants implies what? Shortage of teachers. So hence it's pointing towards scarcity of labor. So for MCQ number 1, the correct answer is B. So we'll shade in B. Alright. MCQ number 2. MCQ number 2 says, Sanjay, a coal miner, became unemployed when the only local mine closed. He lives in a village near the family and friends and would like to stay in the same village. What is the cause of Sanjay's occupational immobility? Now they're saying you have to tell us why do you think Sanjay is occupationally immobile? They're not referring to his geographical mobility. Read the question again. They are asking why do you think he is unable to move to a different job because of his occupation, not tied to a particular geographical location, but because of his skill set. So he's a coal miner with no skill set. So this means when a single mine was closed, he became redundant, right? So this points towards what? The very explanation of the MCQ points towards the answer itself. Since he does not have a wide skill set, he does not have the relevant skills. So when the only local mine closed in the area, he is redundant. Therefore, for MCQ number 2, the correct answer is B. So we'll shade in B. MCQ number 3. MCQ number 3 shows the PPC curve for an economy. This is at point X. So initially the economy is at X on the PPC. That means it's producing at its max. The vertical axis displays the output of capital goods. The horizontal axis displays the output of consumer goods. Now, what's the question asking? The question is saying which change in the economy's labor market will allow it to reach to point Y. Now, why do you think a PPC would shift outside? It's shifting towards the right. The entire PPC is going to shift, right? Why? Because it's originally at point X. Moving towards from point X to point Y means what? Increase in the productive capacity of the economy, right? So either it could be the quantity of labor or the quality of labor. Either there is a rise in the quality of labor or improvement in the quantity of labor, right? Let's look at the options. Employed workers become more productive. Unemployed workers find new jobs. Workers emigrate for higher wages. Workers retire at younger ages. It cannot be C, it cannot be D because both C and D would be reducing the amount of labor. B says unemployed workers find new jobs. If the workers were unemployed, so those workers finding jobs would mean that we would now be moving to the PPC, on the PPC, not beyond the PPC. But point Y means that you are moving to a point beyond the PPC. So this means it has to be what? Option A, when employed workers become more productive, right? So for 3, it has to be A. MCQ number 4. MCQ number 4 says, what are both macroeconomic decisions? Now you have to satisfy both parts of the table, right? Macroeconomic decisions are what? Decisions that talk about aggregates, that talk about affecting the entire economy and not in isolation. We are not talking about an individual household or an individual firm, right? We are referring to the macroeconomy, we are referring to the totality, we are referring to the aggregates. A says a school recruits more teachers, B says a firm. Uh, the second part, I'm sorry, the first part talks about the school, the second part talks about a firm. C, it talks about the government increasing tax rates, but the second part talks about the farmer. In option D, the first part talks about a household, the second part talks about a worker. So you see, in A, in C, and in D, either of the parts are referring to the individual decision makers. But we want to talk about the macroeconomic decisions, right? We want to talk about the aggregate. So we need to satisfy both parts. So it's only in option B where we are talking about the macroeconomic decisions at both ends. Look at B. A central bank reduces money supply. The second part talks about the government spends more on defense. So here we are talking about the aggregates. It cannot be A, it cannot be C, it cannot be D, because in all of these three, in one way or the other, we are talking about individual, firm, or households. So for MCQ number 4, the correct answer is B. MCQ number 5. The table shows the quantity of coffee demanded per day and the quantity supplied per day. What's the equilibrium? The equilibrium is at price 10. So when price is 10, the demand is 20 kilos and the supply is also 20 kilos. They're saying at this equilibrium price, what will be the expenditure on coffee? It's simple. The price is 10, so $10 into 20. So the expenditure should be $200. So the correct answer for MCQ number 5 is C, $200. So we'll shade in C for MCQ number 5. MCQ number 6. MCQ number 6 is not tricky. Just need to focus a little on the graphs and it's easy to understand. Let's look at it. MCQ number 6 says the diagram shows the demand curve for the only two buyers in a market. So the first curve is a straight line graph. The second, it's a little elastic and then it's steepened downwards, sloping downwards. Now, they are displaying only the two buyers in a market, right? Now, what are they asking? They are saying what would be the shape of the market demand curve for the good. So now we are going to, in order to derive the market demand curve, we are going to be adding both of these individual demand curves. So we'll add the shape of both the first curve and the second. And then we'll determine out of these four options available, A, B, C, and D, which do you think would be the most suitable? If you look at option A, obviously by looking at the shape, it cannot be Y because B is not in this shape, right? For household B, for buyer B, it was not like that. If you look at option B, it shows a straight line afterwards, which it could not be because the second household graph was not like that. So you see, you have to pick that option which displays both of the purchasing pattern of both of the buyers. So it's in option C that you can find the answer, right? So for MCQ number 6, the correct option is C. So we'll shade in C for MCQ number 6. MCQ number 7. MCQ number 7 says the diagram shows the market for ice cream and the effects of very hot weather. Now, if prices had remained at P1 even during the hot weather, it says what was likely to have happened in the market for ice cream. Now, what's happening? It's hot and the demand for ice cream has shown a surge. You can see that the entire demand curve has shifted towards the right by a large extent. Now, the price has risen. But what they're saying even if the price had remained at P1, let's suppose the price had remained at P1, so what could have happened? What could have happened? There would have been, this shaded region would have been what? Excess demand. But at this price, suppliers wouldn't be willing to supply. So it would lead towards what? A shortage. Exactly. So for 7, it has to be D. 8. The supply of which good is likely to be most price elastic. This means that a little price elastic means a small change or a little change in price will bring around a big change in quantity, right? So quantity is responsive only if storage is easy and it would be less time consuming. So if storage is easy and it's less time consuming, so this means what? The good is easily stored, yes, and time taken to produce the good is only 1 day. That's the least amount of time required. So for 8, it has to be C. 9. What is characteristic of a demerit good? A demerit good is what? Which is harmful and it is overconsumed, right? So what would be? It would be for 9B. It is overconsumed in the free market because a demerit good is a good which is harmful and it is overconsumed. Alright. So for 9, we'll shade in B. MCQ number 10. MCQ number 10 says the table shows the average wage in 4 countries A, B, C, and D. Now they're saying in which country is there a greatest relative wage discrimination against female employees? How will you calculate the greatest relative wage discrimination? Alright. So for that, first you need to find in the difference between the male and the female. If you look at it, the difference between the male and the female in the first is a 20. In option B, it's a 60. In option C, it's a 40. The difference in dollars. And in D, it's $100. But in order for you to calculate the relative change, you need to divide it by the amount of wages that the males were earning. So for 20, you'll divide by 100. For 60, you'll divide by 120. 40, you will divide by 140. And 100, you will divide by 300. Now, once you'll calculate the answers, see what you're getting. Here, you'll get a 50% change. Here, you'll get a 2.8, 0.28, and here you'll get a 33%. So, which is displaying the most, the highest disparity? 50%. B. This is showing 20%. C is displaying 28% difference. D is displaying 33%. It's in option B, which is displaying 50% difference. So for 10, it has to be B. 11. 11 is displaying us the average total cost curve. The vertical axis is displaying the cost. The horizontal is displaying the output. The MCQ is saying why is the movement from X to Y likely to result from this merger? Now there was a merger, but what had happened was that the average total cost had risen. So now you see, if initially the average total cost was at X, now it has moved towards Y. Now what could have caused that? It's showing what? Managerial diseconomies of scale. The merger should have brought benefits, but instead of bringing benefits, it caused a rise in the average total cost. From X, we shifted to Y, right? So what does this show? This shows, if you look at the options, the firm faces problems of coordination between departments. Managerial diseconomies of scale. So for 11, we'll shade in C. 12. A restaurant employs 2 chefs who make all the meals that are served to the customers. What is most likely to increase the productivity of the chefs? Why do you think the productivity of the chefs lows if there are only 2 chefs that provide and serve to all the customers? A says a decrease in the number of customers in the restaurant. B says a decrease in the chef's pay. It cannot be B. Why? Because it will be demotivating. C says an increase in the quality of the food. D says an increase in the training for the chefs. Yes, it's D. Why? Because it's leading towards an increase in the productivity of the chef, right? The higher the training, the more productive your labor force would be. So, for 12, it has to be B. Number 13. What are fixed costs? By definition, we all know fixed costs are costs which need to be paid even if the output level is 0, for example, rent. So, by definition, we know that fixed costs are costs that are present even when the output is zero. So for number 13, the correct option is B. 14. MCQ number 14 says the table shows the daily output and costs of four firms making chairs. Which firm has the highest average cost of production? So in order to calculate the highest average cost of production, first we need to take out the total cost of production. So how will we calculate the total cost of production? We'll add fixed costs and variable costs. So you'll add fixed costs and variable costs for all the four options. For option number A, you will add 100 and 140, you will get 240. 30 plus 150, you'll get 180. 200 and a 160, you'll get a 360. 120 and a 330, you'll get a 450. This is the total cost. But what's the question? It's asking you average cost of production. In order to calculate average cost of production, you will divide the total cost with the output units. So for option A, you will divide 240 by 6. In B, you will divide 180 by 9. For option C, you will divide 360 by 12. For D, you will divide 450 by 15. And what are the answers that you're going to get? 40 for A, 20 for B, 30 and 30 each for C and D. What's the question asking? Highest. Which is giving the highest average cost of production? Option A, in which you are getting a $40. $40. So for 14, you'll shade in A. I hope this is clear. 15. The only information known about a firm is the price it charges for its product and the quantity it sells. So you only know the price and the quantity. So once you know the price and the quantity, what does it yield you? Exactly, it tells you about the revenue. Now, let's look at the options. What else can be concluded from this? The average cost and profit, it cannot tell you about the cost because it's not giving you any information about the cost price. So when you don't know anything about the cost price, how can you talk about the average cost? Similarly, it cannot be B, again it's talking about average cost. C says average revenue and profit. It cannot be profit because again you don't know the cost price. So once you don't know the cost price, how can you talk about the difference between the cost and the selling price, which would tell you about the profit? So you will chop C. The only option by elimination left is D. But then again, let's look at the logic. It's saying the average revenue and the total revenue. That's correct because P into Q tells you about total revenue, and once you will divide it by the quantity, you can also arrive at the average revenue. So yes, for 15, we'll shade in D. I hope it's clear. 16. MCQ number 16 says, if a very competitive market becomes a monopoly, what will be likely to increase and what will be likely to decrease? So if it's a very competitive market, it becomes a monopoly, what do you think should happen? Profits in the long run will increase and the competition has to decrease. Yes. Barriers to entry increase, but economies of scale should not have been decreasing. Because if it's a monopoly, it operates at a larger scale. Consumer choice will never increase because it's a monopoly, now it's a single firm, so you'll chop B, you'll chop A. D says output will increase and market share will decrease. No, it should have been vice versa. Why? Because now it's a single firm. The output should have been decreased. It should have been the one restricting it. And market share would have been increasing because it's larger in size. So for 16, we'll shade in C. MCQ number 17. Many central banks around the world decreased interest rates during recession caused by pandemic. What was most likely macroeconomic aim of this policy? Now, why do you think most central governments or central banks reduced the interest rates during the period of recession when the world was hit by a pandemic? Because it wanted to boost aggregate demand, right? Recession was causing a fall in aggregate demand. They wanted to boost aggregate demand. They wanted to boost economic growth. So for 17, we'll shade in A. 18. The diagram shows the percentage of income taken by tax at different levels of income. The vertical axis shows the percentage paid in tax, the horizontal axis shows income. Now notice what happens. As we move towards higher income, the proportion taken in tax reduces. What does this shows? What does this tell us about the nature of tax? It's indirect? No, it's progressive. Had it been progressive, we should have been taking more proportion as income should have been raising. So see what, let's say if this was 2000, now you move to 4000, now you move to 6000. So instead of the tax rate rising, the tax rate is decreasing the proportion. So it's what? It's regressive in nature. So for 18, it's D. The diagram itself is very self-explanatory. I hope it's clear. MCQ number 19. What is not a likely consequence of a rise in the budget deficit in a year? This means what? What are they saying? They are saying that the revenues are less than the costs incurred by a firm or the expenses incurred by a, an economy, by the government. What did not happen? What's the question? They're saying what did not happen because of a budget deficit? A rise in government borrowing, a rise in the national debt, a rise in the rate of inflation. This all could have happened because it's a budget deficit. The expenses were more than the revenues. The earnings it would have earned by way of taxes were less than the spending it made, right? So the government spent more than it earned. So yes, a rise in the level of exports. So for 19, we'll shade in B. Number 20. While a government aims to encourage economic growth, it may adopt supply side policies. Which policy is a supply side policy? We all know supply side policies aim to increase the aggregate supply, right? So they want to increase the productive potential. So retraining unemployed workers. For 20, it has to be D. By definition, it says D. But if you look at the options, A and B talks about what? Monetary policy. C is talking about fiscal policy. So hence we are left with D by elimination. But by logic also, when we are talking about increasing the aggregate supply, improving the productive potential, so this means for 20, it has to be D. I hope it's clear. 21 says an economy that is fully employed is forecast to have an increase in total demand. So the economy is already on its VPC. Now, if there's an increase in total demand, what do you think should increase? Inflation. So for 21, we'll shade in D. 22. Which 22 says a government conducted a labor force. It included people of working age. The results are shown. Which percentage of working age people are in the labor force? Now we know labor force includes people who are willing and able to work. So the working age includes 10 million people, employed are 7 million, unemployed are 1 million, and not seeking work are 2 million. So we will not consider not seeking work because by definition we will include those people in the labor force who are willing and able to work. So those who are already working are 7 and unemployed means that yes, they are willing and able to work but temporarily they are unemployed or for the time being they are unemployed due to any reason. So we'll add 7 million and 1 million. This will give us 8 million. So 8 million over 10 into 100, that's an 80%. So for 22, we'll shade in C. I hope it's clear. 23. A school leaver is unable to find a job immediately after completing the education. Which type of unemployment is this? Now he is unable to find a job because he's just moved out of school. So by definition, it points towards which type? It points towards frictional unemployment. Why? Because frictional unemployment talks about unemployment which is temporarily unemployment, right? So for 23, yes, we'll shade in B, but why it can't be A, C or D? It cannot be D because D talks about structural unemployment, which is caused by long-term changes in the pattern of demand and methods of production. Here we are not talking about patterns of demand. It cannot be regional because again it's not talking about any geographical location. It cannot be A, which is talking about cyclical because it's unemployment caused by a lack of aggregate demand, right? So for 23, it has to be B. 24. Which changes are likely to lead towards the biggest increase in inflation in country X? Biggest increase in inflation. Demand for goods and services and supply of goods and services. So there has to be the widest gap. The gap should be widest. The demand should have been more and the supply should be less. Then only you will have the highest inflation. The wider the gap, the more the inflation would be. And when would be the gap widest? When the supply is unable to cater to the increase in or the surge in demand. So let's look at the option. When there is a 5% increase in demand and there's a 5% decrease in the supply, so the gap would be the widest. So for 24, we'll shade in C. That will only bring the biggest increase in inflation. So the gap has to be the widest. 25. In rural areas in developing countries, farmers grow food for their own consumption. Why might this cause GDP to be a weak measure of the standard of living in those countries? Now, when farmers grow for their own consumption, this means what? This means it's called as subsistence farming. Now, they are saying, why do you think subsistence farming is causing the GDP to be a poor indicator in this case for standard of living? Because the value of the food is unknown. We do not know about the amount of food that was grown by the farmer. We do not know. So it goes unreported, right? So for 25, it has to be D. Number 26. Japan's population has an increasing proportion of elderly people. So this means it has got a more proportion of dependent population. What is the least? What is the likely impact of this on the Japanese economy? This means what? The government would be spending more towards the provision of goods and services for the elderly, which means pensions or which means spending on healthcare, right? So this means what? Increased rate of economic growth? No, we are talking about elderly people. Increased rate of immigration? No, again we are talking about elderly people. Increased use of labor intensive metal? No, we are talking about elderly people. So it has to be government budget deficit. Why? Because the government will be spending more on healthcare and the provision of pensions for the elderly. So for 26, it has to be A. So by both logic and elimination has shown that for 26, the correct response is A. 27. An Argentine product initially sells in the US for $50 when the exchange rate between the two countries is 5 pesos to $1. So let's write it down. Initially, what was the exchange rate? $1 is equals to 5 pesos. And an Argentine product was selling in the US for $50. So if it was selling for $50, in Argentine, what should have been its price? 250 pesos, right? So far clear? Now what do you say? The exchange rate changes to 10 pesos to $1. Now, the new exchange rate says that now $1 is equals to 10 pesos. However, the price of the product remains unchanged in Argentina. Notice, in Argentina, the price of the product remains unchanged. What was the price of the product initially that we found out? 250. So now it's again at 250. What are they saying? What is the new price in US? So how will you calculate it? You will divide it by 10. So it would be 25. So for 27, it has to be B. Simple maths. Write down the information and you will derive at the correct answer. I hope it's clear. 28. Mining by MNCs had both costs and benefits for the host nation. That means for the country in which it is operating. It brings in advantages and disadvantages, MNCs. They're saying which activity is least likely to offer a benefit to the host nation. Why do you think it would bring in least advantage to the host country? A says developing courses for training in mining. No, that would be an advantage. B says investing in infrastructure to export minerals. Again, this would be an advantage. D says using new technology. Again, that would be an advantage. C says repatriating profits and dividends. Yes, that is when it will bring in no benefit to the host country, because whatever the profits it's earning, it's repatriating, it's reusing or reinvesting in its own firm, right? So for 28, it has to be C when it brings in no advantages. All A, B, and C, A, B, and D are bringing advantages except for option C. 29. The table shows the retail price at which the same book can be bought in 4 countries. Now, what done is they have displayed the names of 4 countries. They have given the price of the same book in local currency in each of these 4 countries. Now, what are they saying? Which additional information is required in order to you to draw a comparison of the price of the book between the countries? You do not know what? The exchange rate. Unless and until you know the exchange rate, you cannot make any meaningful comparison, right? So for 29, the correct option is B. Last MCQ for today. What is a consequence of a surplus on the current account of the balance of payment? This means what? This means because of a surplus in GDP, what had happened? It cannot be A, because had there been a surplus in the current account on GDP, there would have been an increase in GDP. It cannot be C, because if there would have been a surplus in the current account in the balance of payment, it would have been appreciation of the foreign exchange rate and not a depreciation. It cannot be D, because D is negative inflation, or it is talking about a sustained fall in the price of goods and services. So it is option B, a decrease in unemployment. Why? Because it will cause an increase in employment level. The surplus will cause an increase in employment level or a decrease in unemployment level. So for 30 MCQ number 30, the correct option is B. I hope you all have understood what we all did today. Stay tuned. I'll be coming up with more solutions for May June 2025 series. Take care. Happy learning.